Are you satisfied with your life? Or are you like the old Rolling Stones song, I can't get no satisfaction? Today we're going to be talking about being satisfied with your life. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we are going to discuss what Solomon has to say in his summary of satisfaction. Our title for the book of Ecclesiastes for the whole series is The Struggle for Contentment. And I have found people today are not content with their life. And Solomon's going to make some observations for us to consider when we come right back. Welcome to Bible Study with Friends. I'm here with my friend Stan Ford, and Stan and I are continuing our series in the book of Ecclesiastes. Today in chapter 6, we're going to be talking about satisfaction. Now, Solomon starts Ecclesiastes with his thesis that all is vanity. His observation is that life is a waste without God, and he's going to make that argument. Then, after chapter 1, he goes into a section talking about his observations that show life is a waste, that life is a vanity. And then he goes into a section starting in chapter 7 of how to function in a life of vanity. And that's when he gets into a little bit more on God's role. But he's talking to the natural man, and the satisfaction is just not guaranteed in life. And we're going to talk about that in detail. All right, now he's been talking about various issues of life, the waste of labor, the waste of money, the waste of religion, the waste of family, without the perspective of God. And every so often he's folded in this idea of, but with God it's different. In chapter 6, we're going to see a summary of his observations in the last few chapters. So we're going to go through this very quickly, and I think it'll be a good review for us. Let's look at the first two verses. This is the idea that there is no satisfaction in wealth. Now, he's talked about that before. In fact, up in verse 19 of chapter 5, furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, God has also empowered him to eat from them and receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is a gift of God. So he was talking about the perspective of wealth with God involved in your life.
Yeah.
Now he's going to give, in this summary, an evaluation of wealth without God. Read verse 1 and 2 together, and then we'll talk about them.
Okay. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and is prevalent among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity and a severe affliction.
He's still talking about the summary of his perceptions that life is a waste without God. And he's going here, I have seen this under the sun, and it is prevalent among men. Now that ties in this idea of I have seen under the sun. You remember back in chapter 2, in fact, in chapter 1, the thesis of life is vain. He said, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
Now that's from a perspective of the natural man who does not have God in his life. So he repeats that. And it's prevalent among men. Now, what that basically means, I have seen this, and it's everywhere I look. If you see mankind going through life without God, this is prevalent.
Yeah. And he's really speaking from experience there.
Oh, yeah.
In that verse right there.
And from experience of as king, he went off the deep end with drug, sex, and rock and roll kind of thing.
Yeah.
And getting older, and he's matured a little bit, and he's getting this perspective of, man, I kind of let God get away from my life.
Yeah.
I'm coming back into this with the observations of what a waste the man without God lives. And he goes into that. Now, this is where he ties in with wealth in verse 2. That's right. The idea of the wealthy.
Yeah.
He's got everything he wants.
Yeah. It's almost, I could be wrong here, but it's almost like he is dependent on his wealth for his satisfaction, and for his,
yeah. And the opposite is up in chapter 5, we have a man with God in his life. God empowers him to enjoy his wealth and enjoy life. But here you have a wealthy man that God is not empowering his life. And as a result, he's frustrated. In fact, this idea of a severe affliction is really bad. I have seen under the sun, and I've seen it all over the place, that just being wealthy isn't enough if God is not involved with your life and if God is not empowering you to enjoy that life. That's that word yet. And then he goes, God has not empowered him to eat from them. Now, the them is the riches and wealth.
Yeah.
And so this idea of eating from wealth is enjoying the wealth. And then he says this a strange thing, for a foreigner enjoys them or eats from them. Okay.
Yeah.
So now this idea of a foreigner is not necessarily like an alien from another country. Foreigner very often just means a stranger, somebody that's not them. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of, remember back in the earlier chapters where he said a man gets great wealth, he works all his life, and he makes this great wealth, and then he dies, and somebody else inherits and spends it. And he doesn't enjoy any of it. All he's doing is working. And that's this idea here that he works and he doesn't enjoy it. In fact, other people, strangers to him even, enjoy it and not him. And he says, this is vanity. This is a waste. This is futility.
Yeah, I like that word when he said this is vanity and a severe affliction.
Yep. And it's an affliction all men are affected with, this same thing.
Regardless of what you have.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So now it switches. So that was the first kind of summary was wealth doesn't do it for you if you don't have God.
Yeah.
Now the next one is from verse 3 to verse 6, those 4 verses. This is the idea of there's no satisfaction in family or in future generations. Now let me read those 4 verses. If a man fathers 100 children and he lives many years, however many they be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial, then I say, better the miscarriage than he, for it comes in futility and goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun. It never knows anything. It is better off than he. Even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place? So that's this question of that he has talked about death a number of times, that everybody dies. And he set up this hypothetical thing of even if you lived 1,000 years twice over, okay, and you had 100 kids, if you don't have God in your life, you might as well be a miscarriage. Now, if we go down here, he says, if his soul is not satisfied with good, our whole title for Ecclesiastes, the series, is the struggle for contentment. So this is the idea of if God is not in your life, you're not content with your life, there's no satisfaction. You can't get it. And he says, your soul is not satisfied with good. He does not even have a proper burial, with no happiness and no solid family relationship based upon God's blessing. The funeral is not proper. There's no big family day. The guy that lives like this, even if he's got a bunch of kids, if there's no satisfaction and there's no joy in life and there's no good things in life, the kids are not even going to respond when he dies. There's just not going to be a good funeral. And he says, in fact, it would be better that he miscarried.
Yeah. There in that verse, in verse 3, he said, if a man fathers 100 children, lives many years, wasn't it a custom that they thought that having a large family was a blessing to them?
Yeah.
That a man that had his quiver full, so to speak.
Right. I was just thinking of that verse in Psalms.
Yeah. And that even though he's talking about his wealth in these other verses, then he starts talking about his children.
He's talking from experience here because he has a lot of concubines, he had tons of children.
Yeah.
And there was no family cohesiveness because they were from all these different women. And he's also speaking from his father, David, had a terrible family relationship. Yeah. Absalom revolted and David had to have Absalom killed. And what a terrible thing. And so he has seen this in his own life and in David's life. And so he's basically saying, look, if there's no satisfaction in life and you can't enjoy the good things in life, like up in chapter 5 with God's help, then you might as well not have been born.
Yeah.
This idea of a miscarriage. Now, there's a couple of interesting verses. Look up in this view of feeling sorry for yourself. Look in the book of Job, chapter 3, starting at verse 11. We're going to read 2 verses in Job.
Why did I not die at birth, come forth from the womb and expire?
So this is, again, he's having a hard time. He's not enjoying this aspect of his life.
Yeah.
And he's basically feeling sorry for himself and says, why wasn't I a miscarriage? Why wasn't I just stillborn than to go through what I'm going through right now? The same concept that he's having here. Better the miscarriage than the guy who can't enjoy life. Better to not have started. Then there's verse 4 and 5 talk about it.
Yeah.
You notice that?
Yeah.
Because the word for is because it comes in futility and goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun, and it never knows anything. The it is the miscarriage. By definition, there's no life, there's no reputation, there's no anything. It's just obscure, and its name is covered in obscurity. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Verse 6, even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place. Now, earlier he's talking about the man who God does not empower to enjoy good things. And then he says, and there's another guy who doesn't enjoy good things. And even if that guy lives 1,000 years twice over, so this is hypothetical, obviously.
Yeah.
He says, but when both of them die, they go to the same place. There's no escaping death in wealth. So there's no satisfaction in wealth. There's no satisfaction in lineage or family or children if you don't have God and the ability to enjoy the good things in life. Now, verse 7 and 8. This goes back to what Solomon talked about earlier of labor. And he says, all a man's labor is for his mouth. Okay, it feeds him.
Yeah.
Yet the appetite is not satisfied. That word appetite is this idea of the soul. There's no deep satisfaction. Never satisfied. The more you have, the more you want.
Yeah.
The more you want, the more you strive and work. Yeah. And the more you work, the more you get, but it doesn't satisfy because you want more. And he talked about that earlier as an observation. And he's basically saying that there's no satisfaction in just work.
Yeah.
And he made that point earlier on that if you work without God in your life, you're never happy. You're never satisfied.
Yep.
You never have enough.
Striving after the wind.
And there's a great verse, we won't read it, but there's a great verse in Proverbs chapter 30, verse 15, that there's never enough. If you have the perspective of God is not involved, there's no satisfaction. And it goes in verse 8, what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have knowing how to walk before the living? So whether you're rich or whether you're poor, if you don't have God in your life, there is no satisfaction.
Yeah.
So just being poor doesn't mean you're happy, and just being rich doesn't mean you're happy.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Because there's never enough. Now, let's go into these last few verses. This last part is there's no satisfaction in the future. Because if you don't have God in your life, and you're working and you're wealthy and all these things, this issue of the future is why people commit suicide. Yeah. We talked about this, how rich people and people that look like they have it all, they're beautiful and they're wealthy and they're powerful, and yet they still commit suicide. Why? Because they look into the future and it's just as frustrating as the life they're experienced there. There's never enough. It's all appetite. And they look into the future and say, I don't see any change coming. I might as well just pull the plug.
Yeah.
So in verse 9, he makes a very interesting observation in this idea of looking into the future. What the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. In other words, reality is better than wishes. Now, even if you're poor, if you have a reality of living a life with God, that's better than having nothing but a craving for more and more and more and more. Now, if you're poor, you can crave for more. If you're rich, you can crave for more. But he's saying it's a whole lot better to see the reality of life than it is to be constantly saying, boy, in the future, I want to be rich, or in the future, I want to be successful, or whatever it is. He says, this too is futility and a striving after wind. That's that famous phrase. It's chasing a breeze. It's a waste. This idea of even living a life that is all about reality and doesn't have any future desires and cravings, that's still a waste and a striving after wind if God's not involved.
Yeah. It's nothing wrong with having things.
No, and there's nothing wrong with even desiring things. If it's consuming and it's there instead of God, it's a waste.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to read verse 10 and 11 both. This is his summation now. Whatever exists, that's the actual thing, has already been named, and it is known what man is, for he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he is. So this is the idea of looking into the future. It's like a gunslinger. There's always going to be somebody faster. There's always going to be somebody who has more, who appears to have it all. And he says it's already been named. Oh, this is success. No, it isn't. And then he says, for there are many words which increase futility. That's interesting. So this idea of you can call success money, you can call success labor, work success, you could call success a big family. These words are used all the time, but the fact that they've been named doesn't mean anything to you. Flip over to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9 and 10.
Okay. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, see this, it is new. Already it has existed for ages, which were before us.
In the very first lesson in Ecclesiastes, we talked about that idea. There are new things under the earth. He's just that his perspective as the natural man, it just seems like there's nothing new.
Yeah.
With God, there's all kinds of new things. We made a list in that lesson, and go back and watch that lesson, and there's a blessing there. But he says that it's already been named. There's nothing new without God in your life.
Yeah.
It's all been done. So there's no satisfaction in looking ahead to the future. That's just using the words, many words, which ultimately should be satisfaction, are futility. They're a waste. What then is the advantage to a man? He asked that question. So where's the advantage to a man? And here's at verse 12. It's his summation, and he's about to move into chapter 7. What advantage is there? For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? Boy, that is a discouraging statement.
Yeah.
This idea of the natural man, he lives a few years, whether it's 70 or whether it's 100. It's a futile life because God has not empowered him in his life to enjoy the good things because God's not there. And he said, he will spend them like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? Now, I want to do two things here. The natural perspective is you don't know what the future holds. You don't know what it's going to be like. And so it's just a waste of time to be thinking about the future. You can't know the future. That's his summation here. For the natural man, but I want you to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 5.
Therefore, do not go on passing judgment before the time, but wait until the Lord comes, who will both bring to light the things hidden in the darkness and to disclose the motives of men's hearts. And then each man's praise will come to him from God.
Okay, so here he's saying, who knows what's going to happen after man? After the sun goes down in your life.
Yeah.
God knows. And God's going to judge. And if you don't have God in your life, it's going to be this futile life. It's going to be nothing. But with God in your life, he says, I'm going to judge and I'm going to bless your life. Now, that gives us the Christian perspective of what it's like with God in our life to look into the future. Flip over to 1 John chapter 4.
Okay.
And I want you to read 3 verses, 15, 16, and 17.
Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him, and he in God. We have come to know and have believed the love which God has for us. God is love, and the one who abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. By this, love is perfected with us, so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment, because as he is, so also are we in this world.
So this idea of if you're abiding in God and God is abiding in you, you have confidence in the future.
Yeah.
You have confidence. Now, what Solomon has been describing is somebody that is not abiding with God and God is not abiding with them. And that is a waste. It's futile. It's striving after wind. That's why Christians shouldn't be worried about the judgment. A non-Christian, he's worried about what's going to happen after me. And he says, it's a waste. There's nothing coming after me. And he's probably correct if God's not in your life. Now, the last verse is in 1 John chapter 5, verse 13.
So these things I have written to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you may know that you have eternal life.
So this idea of you can know you have eternal life. So when he says there, he spends him, it's a shadow. And who can tell him what's going to happen afterward under the sun? Who's going to tell him what the future is? One way we can have confidence in the future. In fact, the only way we can have confidence in the future and satisfaction in our life, in our current life, is with God abiding in our lives.
Yeah.
And that's really the summation here, is he's giving the view from the natural man, and it's frustrating. It's a waste. It's futile. It's like trying to catch the wind in your hand. It's just not going to work. But we have the perspective of the New Testament and the Lord Jesus. Yes, indeed, you can know the future. And yes, indeed, you can live a fulfilled satisfied life, a life of contentment.
Yeah.
And that answers the struggle for contentment that he talks about in
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes. And this is what he constantly brings up, is the futility of the natural man, and said, but if God is involved, it's different. Today we've been talking about the struggle for satisfaction. Solomon makes an observation that man without God cannot find satisfaction. And just living life, satisfaction is not guaranteed. And I want to recommend a video to you. It's the story of Jacob, who went from a scoundrel to a man who wrestled with God and won a great victory. It's the link's right here. Hope you enjoy it. And listen, we're going to continue with Ecclesiastes next week. And until then, God bless you.